Can you learn to appreciate aromas such as spice, petrol, and even gamey or foxy notes in wine? And would you want to, or should you? How does the color of wine influence our perception of how it tastes? And why is mouthfeel really important to appreciating wine? Well, you're going to get all those tips and insider stories with our guest tonight, whom I'll introduce momentarily. If you're watching this video on the replay, please get in the comments and let me know. Replay, you can just type the word replay. What's the weather like? What's in your glass? I'll be there live in the comments with you and responding. I'm Natalie McLean, and I offer online wine and food pairing classes, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine, like our guest. Now, this video is the first time I'm live streaming it, but it is based on a recording for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk. That said, I will be here live in the comments. So again, if you're watching the replay, but also if you're here live on the live stream, get in there. Let me know what tips and questions you're enjoying, or stories, any questions that we haven't answered. I'll be there live with you to get into the comments. All right, before I introduce our guest, let me say that 2 of you will win a copy of his terrific new book. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you want to win a copy. I'll choose 2 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. Gus Zhu is the first Canadian. I've just switched your nationalities, Gus. Sorry about that. You're the first Chinese national to become a master of wine. And he works as a research and development scientist at Harv 81 Group in California, specializing in chemical analysis and sensory studies of the aroma compounds in wine, cork, and oak. Gus holds a Master of Science degree in viticulture and enology from UC Davis. He graduated from that in 2017 and then achieved a Master of Wine qualification in 2019. He's been busy. In addition to his research in flavor chemistry and sensory science, Gus is a professional wine educator, offering tutorials to wine enthusiasts around the world. He joins us now from his home in Napa Valley. Gus, we're so glad to have you here with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Natalie. It's a great pleasure talking to you.
All right, great. Okay, your book is so fascinating. Congratulations on publishing it. But just before we dive in there, what was the exact moment you realized you wanted to make wine your career?
Well, kind of long story. I'll try to make it short. So in my childhood, I grew up in China, but we don't have a wine culture necessarily, but we do have some other beverages, especially the infamous 50% alcohol by volume baijiu, the white liquor, as a national drink in China. And I've been immersed in these kind of alcoholic beverage smells since my childhood, because all the adults at the dinner table or at some like formal dining settings, they drink those kind of alcohols. And those kind of smells actually really fascinates me, probably because my dad smokes. And I'm like, okay, sometimes I find it interesting and sometimes I find it a bit not that pleasing. So I was just thinking about those kind of smells a lot since childhood. And then I got the chance to study horticulture as my undergrad degree in China Agricultural University. And in that university, one of the professors, Professor Ma, she hosted this wonderful wine appreciation class. And that got me hooked into wine. And miraculously, after actually a bit before graduation, I got a chance to be interned at a wine consulting company with 2 other masters of wines. Well, back then they weren't masters of wines, but now they are. So I interned there and I worked there for 5 years.
Oh, wow. What a great introduction to the world of wine, especially through scent, which of course is your fascination and the subject of this book. So take us to the best moment of your career, the Master of Wine. I know it takes thousands of dollars and hours and hours and hours of years of study. But how did you feel when you finally got there and earned this really prestigious designation, especially being the first Chinese national to earn it?
Yeah, of course I felt great, excellent, lots of wines and food to celebrate with. But To be honest, I passed the exam on the first attempt,
Wow.
which kind of shocked myself.
Yeah, because
But
the pass rate's only 10% or something really low, isn't it?
yeah, but
Yeah.
in retrospect, I felt really lucky because I had a different education backgrounds. So I was a Chinese student, and in China, we have the very famous college entry exam that basically determine the fate of most people in China, whether you go to a better college and whether you can get better salaries in the future, right? So we work really hard on it, and so we practice a lot for that college entry exam when we hit around 18 years old. And then I got the chance to work with with the two wonderful masters of wines. They are from British education background, so I also learned from them. I also know about Chinese wine market, what's happening in China, and then I moved to the States doing academic studies at UC Davis. And also I see what's happening in the United States. So I guess all these worldwide educational experience really helped me. So I feel very grateful and I feel lucky.
Wow. Well, okay. Yeah. The harder you work, the luckier you get, right? Because like it's a tribute to your skills, your intelligence, but also how hard you must have worked for that. So well done. So tell us in a nutshell what this book is about. Do you have that book there?
Of
With you,
course.
close by? Yeah, okay, hold it up, give it a good product shot, hold it to the camera. Yeah, behind the glass. And so for those of you who are listening to our conversation, we'll put the link to the book in the show notes, of course, and the cover. Terrific. So then, Gus, tell us in a nutshell what this book is about and what makes it different from other books about wine science.
So I didn't intend to write a book from the very beginning because
Okay.
I just want to put some information together to answer people's questions. Because back in China and even in the States, I've been doing some consulting and wine education. And lots of people started to ask me questions or they discuss among them saying, okay, why exactly we smell or taste this and that in a glass of wine? And there are quite a lot of questions that can be that can be answered from a cultural or commercial perspective, but in terms of scientific understandings and those kind of answers to those questions, is still a bit tricky. In terms of, first of all, science is a bit, to most people, is people were, I want to be geeky, but it could be a bit complicated. What if I didn't learn chemistry? What if I didn't learn this and that? The second reason is that in the scientific world, there are still quite a few questions that are not answered, especially in terms of wine tasting. In the book, I actually address some of the aspects that we still need further research on. But anyway, so I want to put these kind of information down. Maybe I was even thinking about a website or a blog or even vlog, although I don't know how to make nice videos like you can, and all these kind of formats. But then I started to talk to my sensory professor, who literally brought me into the sensory science world, and I talked to some other people, and I'm like, okay, maybe I can just write information down and try to organize them into a book. And it took me roughly 5 years. And honestly, the first 2 years is less about writing. I just write all the information down, which is kind of easy to me because I reference research papers and then use my own words to interpret. But the difficult part is that how do I structure the book? So I thought for about 2 years until I came up with a structure that I think is okay. So I hope the readers can give me feedback saying if this kind of structure is easy to understand or not.
Absolutely. And what is the structure of the book? How would you summarize that in a nutshell?
Yeah, so it's very straightforward. It's just like the title of the book is the chemical terroir and the sensorial terroir. So it basically covers two parts. One is the chemistry part. The other is the sensory part.
Okay. And I haven't heard anybody use those terms. I'm not sure if you came up with them. I mean, in the wine world, we hear the word terroir often. It usually refers just generalizing here, soil, climate, geography, there's other factors. But you have, as you say, chemical terroir versus sensorial terroir. What are they and how are they different?
Yeah, so of course I came up with these terms.
Okay.
And also it's during my 2 to 3 years of thinking, because the title wasn't set until probably after 2 years of writing and thinking. But one day people started to, I think it's somewhere in Napa, and I went to some tastings and people started to talk about terroir again. And then I suddenly it came to me that, wow, is nowadays, of course, it's not about the soils anymore, right? It originally come from the terroir term originated from the soil meaning, from the French world, and I'm like, okay, terroir actually encompasses so many different aspects nowadays. So I personally would just try to explain, hey, anything that can influence the taste of a glass of wine, those factors can be terroirs. So in the introduction part of my book, I used probably two short paragraphs to explain why the terroir term is so broad nowadays. So I would want to talk about the chemistry and the sensory part of wine tasting, and to make a bit more charming term, I came up with the term chemical and sensorial terroir.
That's great. Expanding our view of terroir. And I'm hearing now terroir is being used in all sorts of things, from olive oil to honey that the bees make to all kinds of stuff. And I'm even hearing words like airwar, like what's in the environment that's, eucalyptus trees and their little oils falling on the grapes and so on. So there's a lot going on. Merroir, I think, is in the ocean. Anyway, it's great that you're expanding our definition of this. What's the most surprising thing you learned while researching or writing the book?
I think the surprising things were not those things that we know, as I mentioned. The surprising things were the things that we do not know yet. So I know quite a bit of the wine chemistry, sensory aspects when I was studying at UC Davis. Also, when I work on my Master of Wine research paper, it's a sensory research paper. So I was quite confident saying, okay, probably for the basics, I understand quite a lot of them. But then I started to research things. I'm like, oh my God, there are still so many things we don't understand yet. So that's a kind of bit surprising. And that is why I spent quite a lot of time, again, try to structure the book in a way that explains the things we know, but also help people to understand that it is actually the things we don't know that is fascinating and interesting, and we have hope for the future, but also with some foundational way of thinking and understanding, you can actually have a good sense of what the future direction would be, such as we will understand more about our tongue, especially the sense of taste, and also for the sense of smell is the least understood part. And we know that in the future, we will reveal more truth about the sense of smell.
That's great. You do have a very scientific approach and mind. I can tell here. It's very systematic, very organized. What's the most interesting thing that someone has said about your book so far?
Okay, so it's only being released in UK at the moment and US very soon. But some of the UK people already said, oh, it's actually easy to understand, which is a huge relief for me, because I really want to write in a way that even people without chemistry or those kind of scientific background can understand, even if they haven't tasted wines yet. I used 6 pairs of wines at the end of the book, try to let people practice, even if they haven't tried those kind of wines. They could find those, even just a sniff, they can find the difference and understand what I talk about in the book. So I guess the feedback I got so far makes me feel like, wow, there are 2 sort of hidden messages I always say to people that I want to deliver from the book that people started to get and made me really happy. Message number one is that wine chemistry is actually interesting and fun. It's not that intimidating. Message number two is that I think it's more interesting, more fascinating, and more fun to understand your own sensories, your own sensory system.
Yeah, I would agree completely. So you've got to, appeal to self-interest and also that, hey, it may be chemistry, but there's wine involved as well. So it's a nice combination. Now, you've written about the misconception about the tongue map. We used to think we had sensors only at the tip of our tongue for sweetness, because that's what we developed first as babies and so on. And then bitter was always at the back and so on. So why is that wrong? And is it just true that we have sensors for all of the major 5 tastes and there's others that might be in the offing to be developed? Is that true? We have sensors everywhere in our mouths for all of the tastes? And, maybe first answer that question.
Yeah, so I'll do conclusion first because it's quite straightforward. Because of the advancement of genetic studies, we now understand that we have taste buds everywhere in our tongue, and each taste bud is responsible for all the tastes. So it's not that, you have a taste bud for one type of taste in front of the tongue. It's about one taste bud tastes everything, and taste buds, they are everywhere. Okay, so that's a conclusion. So that should be very straightforward.
And are the taste buds also on the inside of your cheeks and your gums and like the other parts of the so-called soft palate?
Yes, and because of anatomy and genetic studies, people even find out that on the soft palate, you still have taste buds. You can still taste all the tastes. There are some very tragic incidents where a patient lost most part of his tongue, but he can still taste all the tastes. Yeah.
Wow.
So that is very straightforward, and I think again it's kind of fascinating to me. And why we got it wrong? Why the tongue map got it wrong? Well, it is because in the past, I would say even nowadays, scientific studies, when we look at them, we have to reference different research papers in proper ways. It got wrong when a Harvard psychologist referenced a PhD research paper back in the 1940s, 50s in a very wrong way. So that people inherited that kind of tongue map without even referencing to the true data and what's happening and what's missing in the data, especially when they see the tongue map. So I think the conclusion is that nowadays is much better in terms of when we do studies and when we publish papers, it has to be peer reviewed. And also nowadays, may I reference one thing that's written in the book is that we actually almost confirmed that we have a 6th taste. So the 5 basic tastes are sweet, sour, umami, bitter, salty, right?
Right.
For those 5 basic tastes, people think, okay, that should be it, but there could be more. So again, with genetic studies, with some other studies, people find out that we should have the 6th taste called fatty taste. So when we can taste the fatty acids, which gives the sensation, the taste of fat. But it's not yet fully confirmed. And why is that? It is because scientists are more cautious now. They do not want to make the same mistakes again. So scientists want to prove again and again and again from different scientific fields. They want to put all the research paper together to 1,000% verify the fact before they send to media, and the media can finally publish an article saying, okay, we now understand we have a 6th taste. So I think it's just a matter of time. I would expect in the next 5 years, we will confirm that 6th taste.
How exciting. And, I always was trying to get my head around the 5th taste that came to the fore, umami, which you told us. And that is, I understand it just very basically being deliciousness or savoriness. How is that different from fat, which I also associate with savory and delicious and round and voluptuous, those kind of tastes?
That's a great point. That's an interesting point. Okay, so let me try to explain. So first of all, the taste of umami, savory, I have to say, as Asian people, we are a bit more proud because it's very easy for us to understand. Why? Because in Asian countries, we have longer history of fermented food products. And also, when in Asian countries, we do, in certain period of time, and even today, for certain protein-based dishes, we do not season those things too much, so that, or cook them so much, so that when we taste certain proteins, such as some seafood, or such as even some broth, we do not add too much salt into it, depending on where you came from. So those kind of protein, amino acids, those kind of pure taste of those kind of things are umami. But we often got confused because they are combining with fat, with salt, with all of these things around us. So if you think about, if you barbecue mushroom, right, in Western culture, you barbecue mushroom and you just do not season it, and when you barbecue mushroom, there could be some like juice and broth release in the little dent, right, in the mushroom, and you just drink the juice. That is a savory, yummy umami taste. And no wonder it's a Japanese professor who isolated some glutamates that actually taste very special. Not special, but it's not mixed up with all these other tastes. It's more pure, that he started to promote the term umami, which actually came from the Japanese term umai, meaning delicious. But actually, the kanji of that Japanese term came from the Chinese character savory or umami. And the Chinese character, as I wrote in my book, actually consists of two parts. One part is fish, the other part is lamb. So long time ago in Asian culture, we understand the pure taste of meat and pure proteins without seasoning. They are closer to the what we so-called the umami taste.
Wow. That's fascinating. My goodness. Okay. Yeah. So let's dig down into your book. You have various areas, as you mentioned. So aromas. You start talking, or you discuss sort of, a lot of people find aromas, vegetal and herbal aromas, off-putting in wine. How can we learn to appreciate them? Should we? Is it an acquired taste? Just like, when we're younger, we don't like bitter tastes of vegetables or whatever. And then as we get older, we grow to like them. But what is your take on vegetal and herbal aromas?
Yes, so those are related to sense of smell, which again is the least understood part. But at least for certain smells throughout evolution, it makes sense that we reject certain smell. For example, if a plant or fruit or food smells vegetal, it's a sign of under ripeness, not that ripe, right? So that in theory, we naturally do not like something that smells pretty green. However, many of those kind of smells in very low concentrations or at the right amount of concentration, okay, they actually serve as important functions in our body or from the outside as communicating tools in between animals and plants, in between us and the nature. So we also learned to like certain smells because they have a function. So I think in a lot of cases, it's more about that right amount of things. For example, in certain wines, people say, oh, there are certain smell, what the wine industry called the reductive smell. They found it stinky. Indeed, certain of those kind of smells like rotten eggs. They are stinky. But sometimes people say, oh, I also smell some flinty smells from some white Burgundy wines. And what is that? It's fascinating. I'm like, hey, those are also reductive smells. Now you don't find them stinky. It is because the correct compound with the right amount of concentration actually stimulates people. So it all depends. It's such a fascinating world, and we only know probably 0.1% of those kind of smells.
Lots of work for you to do in the future there, Gus. But yeah, you're right. Even in perfumes, I've read a couple of books about the making of different perfumes because it's so closely parallels wine, and just sometimes they'll put the weirdest things in there, and it's just almost you would think they'd be putrid, but there's just like that bass note or something like an orchestra. You need that sort of the different notes combining to make that beautiful sound together. And if it's all sweet and, beautiful flutes, then it's not that interesting, right?
Exactly. And some of the agents they put in certain perfumes we don't even want to talk about in this video because
I've heard of ambergris from Wales.
Yeah.
That's excreted ambergris, and it's expensive. Ugh.
And you know what? Ambergris, it has certain smells that is classified in my book, now a bit technical. It is a big group of aromas called the terpenoids. They have tons of terpenoids. But in
like
wines,
turpentine?
Yeah.
Is it related?
People, okay. Yeah. So people in the wine world, they always say terpene. So terpene is a type of terpenoids. So let's just say terpene, which wine people knows the most. So terpene, actually people say, oh, I smell terpene. No, terpene has probably 20,000 of different compounds. So for certain terpenes, you can find in ambergris, and for certain terpenes you can find in wine, and for certain terpenes you can also find it in different plants or different animals, and some of them are extremely attractive to people in terms of smell. Some smells could be very strange or revolting, such as the petrol smell in Riesling. It's also a type of terpenoids, so it's a type of terpene. So it's just so many of them. That,
wow. I bizarrely love petrol, but then again, it reminds me of summers by the lake with the outboard motor and going to gas stations and loving the smell of gasoline. I don't know, maybe I was getting high as a kid in the back seat, but it is bizarre,
Not really, because I also explained in my book, there's always connections. You know what? Nowadays, even some biofuels were synthesized by terpenes. So there's correlations.
Yeah, and it's all closely tied to memory as well. So it's powerful, very powerful. What terpenes would we like, aside from my bizarre liking of petrol? But what do people generally say they like in the classification of terpene smells?
I would say most terpenes people like, because if you think about most of the flowers, right, they have terpenes. And also in Asian countries, maybe all over the world now, people burn some wood like incense, right? Incense has lots of terpene smell. So there are certain things, such as I mentioned aromatherapies in the book, that they actually use a lot of terpene smell to help people become calm and relax and making them feel better. But I also mentioned that this is something we're probably going to talk a lot later, is that do not just say this terpene smell will make you feel good, because certain people, they could be anosmic to it. They cannot smell certain aromas. And also to certain people, like the same terpene smells great, but the same terpene to some other people, because of how they brought up and because of their genetics, they found it disgusting. So it really depends on people's variability on smelling things as well.
Absolutely. You mentioned anosmic, and is that like a blind spot for one particular odor?
So anosmia, specific anosmia, is everybody has certain kinds of specific anosmia. It doesn't mean you are better or worse. It just means that the sense of smell, the genes related to sense of smell, is just so broad and so complex so there has to be some, I would say, bugs or glitches for your sense of smell. right? And
Right.
usually it is because evolution-wise, we started to lose certain smells because they are not that important to us anymore. The sight is more important to people, but the sense of smell is not that important in terms of survival. I kind of disagree with that kind of explanation.
Yeah, especially in the liquor store. Well, then again, you can't smell the wines in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I get it. Like, we're very visual as a culture.
Yeah, so of course, to us, wine professionals, so we always think sense of smell is very important. But evolution-wise, yes, certain sense of smell, we just lose it. And it really, if you think about 1 trillion different codings for our genetics for the smell, right? There must be, for each person, some of the, genetic codings will go muted, or they will go through some changes. So we really start to smell things differently from each other.
Yeah. Now, everyone's different, but does there tend to be 1 or 2 smells that are high on that hit list of a lot of people can't pick this up? The asnosia, whatever.
Anosmia. Yeah, it's a very twisted, tongue twist term. Sorry, this is a very, not very, but all the technical terms jumping from the book.
No worries.
But I would say it's hard to predict. You have to do studies. And that is why in our field, when we do sensory science, we always see differences among people. And for certain type of things, such as the sight, like you can actually test genetics and find out if you are blind, green-red color blind or not. You can just see that. And also for the sense of taste, you can just see some people are super sensitive to certain taste on the tongue, and certain people are not. It's quite obvious. But for the sense of smell, it's just so unpredictable. You can find some of the most, we're probably going to address that term, super tasters for the taste. Yes. They are very sensitive. But for the nose, for certain smells, whether or not they are sensitive to certain aromas is so unpredictable.
That is interesting. I was tested by Tim Hanai,
yeah.
in California, and it turns out I am a super taster, but it's a bit of a misnomer, as he likes to point out continually on social media, that it doesn't mean you're a better taster, but just you're more sensitive to that bitter compound, right?
Yeah, so Tim Hanai is one of the inspirations for my book, right? He always advocates how we taste differently from each other. And of course, indeed, nowadays we find out that at least for the taste, again, not smell, but for the taste, we can see certain people are super sensitive and certain people are not that sensitive. So for those kind of very sensitive people, we say they are super tasters. However, I always say that they are actually, in a modern society, they are not that, they are a bit of unlucky, because
so sensitive.
There are so many things they cannot eat, like spicy food, like even, let's say, now even we have a trend of lower alcohol beverages, right? But even low alcohol wine or those kind of beverages, to those super tasters, they still taste the burn from alcohol. So that's a bit, I feel bad for them.
That's okay. You don't have to feel too bad for us. So we can get around things by training and practicing. But I can't walk past the olive section in a grocery store. If those olives are out, like on a buffet style, it's like it'll make me sick. And that's smell, though. But anyway.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Now, you talk about unpleasant aromas, others like foxy and gamey. Maybe tell us a bit about what those really are, if we can put language to help people understand what those aromas are, and maybe how they appear in wine, what your discussion around those aromas is in the book.
Yes, those are less about the sensory or chemistry based. I think for those kind of gamey and interesting aromas from the nature, I think people should just eat and drink more and pay more attention to nature. And why is that? Because I have to say, especially I live in different cultures, right? In China, we eat lots of weird parts of animals. But if you think about like European countries in the past, even the more noble people, the emperors, those kind of people, they eat the eyeballs of certain animals, or they eat the tongue of certain animals, and they usually contain certain gamey or foxy or interesting tastes. But in North America, especially in United States, I found probably because of, the history, people tend to eat meat that's very, I shouldn't say bland, but
Bland, I was going to say. I think it is. Generally,
Okay.
like supermarket meats are very bland. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you do not like those weird taste meat, it's okay. It's totally up to you, your lifestyle. But I just want to say, those people who, like a Chinese, we eat all parts of any animals, probably, we actually experience more of those kind of interesting tastes. Whether or not we like it is a personal thing. But actually, in our culture, we do appreciate more of those kind of tastes simply because of the more higher diversity of exposure.
Yeah. So gamey, I get kind of like game meats like bison or buffalo or sometime or deer, venison, whatever. It's kind of like not as well. It's a bit more
Not as
exotic, I guess. To
pure.
yeah,
Yes.
exotic to the North American palate. I should recalibrate my assumptions here. I get that, like that, those kind of aromas in food and drink, I guess. But what is foxy? Surely we're not referring to the little fox and wine tasting like the fox, are we?
It is when people started to describe those kind of aromas, it is kind of related to the foxy smell from a wild fox fur-like smell. But I'm pretty sure there are some related aroma compounds. But in most cases, it's just people trying to use a reference point to describe the smell. And that is again why I emphasize on the fact that if you experience more smell and taste, or you pay attention to more smell and taste in your life, the more descriptors you will have. So if you look at most of us, right, in the wine industry, we really pay attention and explore all sorts of food and beverages, and we pay attention to the smells around us because that is helping us to build up the vocabulary. But on the other hand, one of the struggles for us, also to you and to most people probably, is that when we try to communicate on media, there are just so many people from different cultures, and some people may just not pay attention to smells at all, which is totally fine. Most people are like that. But it's just hard to communicate, right? Because we lack reference points. But to, let's say, color, to vision, to the shape is so easy because
That's
people
easy.
see different colors every day. People see this kind of triangle versus round shape every day. So it's super easy. But for the sense of smell, it's super difficult simply because we were not brought up by paying attention to different smells.
Absolutely. Like, I could easily tell you that and communicate easily to someone else, russet, fuchsia, pink, orange, and they're all in that sort of reddish spectrum. But foxy, feral, gamey, then I'm thinking,
It's
I don't
hard.
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so why do certain aromas like musty or animalistic ones become more acceptable to wine lovers over time? Is that even the barnyard, the so-called euphemistic name sometimes for manure or whatever in Burgundy or whatever? Do we just accommodate, or do we? Is our sense of taste or smell becoming more evolved that we grow to like these? Or are we just accommodating to them, or what's going on there?
I think, okay, so this could be a bit personal, and this is nothing scientific. To me, I just think that certain weird smells, especially in certain natural wines, right, which seems to be popular nowadays, but honestly, to myself and to some people around me, certain weird smells like barnyard, those kind of smells, we cannot accept. So I have a feeling is that it is the wine industry or the media try to promote certain style of wines, like natural wines, that they make people believe that quite a lot of people love those kind of smell and taste. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure
I'm with
about
you.
that.
Yeah, no.
I'm not sure about that. And the one thing that is related to my book is that certain smells, right? If you in natural wines, let's say I have a glass, not a natural wine, but in this glass, there are some weird smells associated with compounds like isovaleric acid. You don't have to remember the term, but certain type of smell or certain type of compound, right?
Does that translate to something? Isovaleric acid? Is that like manure? What is that?
Well, stinky smell in general.
Stinky,
there are
okay.
so many different type of stinky smell.
Okay.
And also sweaty, or some people say some really bad cheesy smell. And some
Right.
other compounds also are responsible for it, but let's not dig into that. But more importantly, those kind of compounds, certain people are very sensitive to it. Certain people are not. So when you taste certain natural wines to certain people, overall, they they smell those kind of wines as less stinky as compared to you. So we need to be aware of that. If they love certain smell, it's either they got used to it, they started to appreciate that, or it is simply because they do not find them that stinky.
Wow. Yeah. I can imagine a dinner party. Here's the stinky wine you love. Would you like some more of it?
It's a stinky one that I found stinky, but you don't find
You
stinky.
don't, yes.
That is hence you like it.
Absolutely. Again, your cultural assumptions, your genetics, everything sets the stage for this. So you've explored both sourness and saltiness when it comes to wine tasting, two overlooked aspects often. How do these interact? How do they play a part? Like, I personally find it hard to differentiate in wine between a so-called salty taste versus acidity versus the even more vague concept of minerality. And maybe we're referring to very similar sensations or tastes, but let's talk about saltiness first. What is it when it comes to wine?
So, if you talk about pure saltiness, just the salt as we eat every day, right? Mm-hmm. That is sodium. Okay? Mm-hmm. So that's sodium chloride. And they do exist in certain wines. It's just chemical analysis. People do not analyze them. There are certain things by law people need to analyze, like alcohol, you have to analyze before you can label and ship and sell the bottle. But salt, people never analyze them. But to me, actually, this is something I will do in the future, is that I would analyze salt in certain wines because people ignore that part. And like a bit of salt in food can greatly change the taste. So I think in certain wines, that tiny amount of salt can change the taste. So that's my personal project.
Are there certain wines? That's a great project. Are there certain wines that generally tend to have a saltier character than other wines, or regions or grapes?
Yeah, that is a thing that we cannot say for sure. So in the book, I did mention that I believe certain wines, like in sherry region, where they even let the wind blowing from the ocean into the cellar, they could induce some salt into the maturation barrels. And also, just based on my classmates' feedback, I have a Greek classmate, they have some outdoor fermenters for their wines in Santorini Island. And they say, okay, if every day after a few hours, if you just touch the outside of the outside jacket of the fermenter, right, fermentation tank, it's a it's an obvious layer of salt. You just touch it and there's salt in your hand. So there is always, and there are some other things I cannot say because it's kind of like a winemaking secret that winemakers can kill me. But you could introduce.
There are protection programs you can. Anyway, okay.
You could.
Some adjustments they're making. All right.
Yeah, no, they are not adding salt deliberately.
Oh, okay.
But they could introduce a tiny bit of sodium through certain winemaking processes. So anyway, I got gone too far on that, but just purely for salt, that is something that could exist in very small volumes in certain wines, and I personally do believe they could change the taste of wine. Having said that, when you refer to all the others, such as acid, minerality, those kind of feelings, those I cannot explain how to say, by mixing them together, because minerality and those kind of sensations are such vague terms and vague concepts that people talk about. So I can only explain, as in the book, in isolation. And I did say, when people say minerality, people may refer to many, many different things to themselves. So that is why minerality, the term, is so difficult to translate in the industry, because people are referring to different things for minerality. But having said that, my sensory professor said one thing, I want to quote hers because I think it's pretty true for the commercial world, is that people tend to be like, whenever they don't know how to describe certain taste or feeling, they use the term mineral.
I love it. I love it. The emperor has no clothes. I find that when I'm tasting and someone says minerality, I immediately think, well, this wine has lots of acidity, but I don't know what you're referring to. For you, do you think, or maybe you just don't even want to define it? To me, minerality should be more of a texture or a feeling than a taste. Like, I'm not tasting minerals, so minerality, I don't know. I don't know. Yes. I think of that Lickamade. I don't know if you grew up in China, so I don't know if you had it there. Yep. But there was this candy that bubbled on your tongue. And to me, that's the closest thing I can think of that like might be minerality, sort of a vibrancy, whatever. I'm not even sure.
So as you mentioned, it really also depends on people's background, right? To me, my reference point for mineral are two things. One is that kind of cold spring water. That gave me this kind of mineral, because they came from the mountain, right, from the cave, and it gave me the feeling. But to my feeling is always the temperature. So whenever I drink something cold, I feel that kind of minerality. The other thing is the smell. So certain people do think certain smells reminds them of some minerals or earths or whatever, rock. To me, yes, I can sort of understand that. So for such certain smell, if you related that to gunflint or those kind of burnt matches or those kind of things, right?
Sulfury,
sulfury type of things, people refer that to mineral, which is also understandable if you have related experience.
Right. Wow. Okay. Now, the book also touches on the complexity of sweetness, the complexities of sweetness perception. How do we misunderstand sweetness when it comes to wine? I mean, first of all, people usually say, well, if you like sweet wine, you're just not that evolved. But I really dislike that, because I think some of the most complex wines in the world have a good amount of sweetness, including German Riesling and the ranges of German Riesling. But what's your take on sweetness and wine?
Yeah, so that's something like, even though this is more like a technical book, which I hope is not too technical, but it does have quite a few content that I want to introduce to people in terms of all the other things related to wine, like history, like culture. They do influence our perception to certain tastes. Like sweetness, the sweet taste genetically by itself is not that complex. It's not as complex as bitter, because we have more genetics, genes responsible for different compounds for bitterness. Anyway, but for sweetness, it's more of a cultural thing, right? So people say they do not drink sweet, while some people still drink sweet and eat sweet stuff.
Talk sweet, drink dry. What is it? Talk sweet, drink dry. Yeah.
Talk
no, it's the other way. Yes, exactly. There we go. Yes.
So it's very cultural. But I just want people to be aware of the fact that lots of the very, very classic wines, they are sweet wines. And this is easy to understand because wine came from Europeans, right? The wine culture from basically come from European countries, and in European countries they didn't have abundant resources of sugar like beet or sugarcane, those kind of things to industrialize sugar production in the past. So grapes are one of the most important gold for getting sugars, energies from. So people respect sweet wines and those kind of, raisined or botrytis wines more simply because sugar was precious in the past. And people do not want to admit they like to eat and drink sweet simply because Coca-Cola is a cheap product and it's everywhere nowadays, right?
Sure, and
so
junk food, the sweetness of junk food.
Yeah.
But to your point, like the highest ranking of all Bordeaux, as you know, Chateau Yquem, above even Chateau Lafite and Margaux and all the rest of them, right at the top of the pyramid in the 1855 classification. I mean, that's a sweet dessert wine from Sauternes.
Exactly. So I always quiz people on two fun facts for the wine world, right? One is, as you just said, Chateau d'Yquem. So I ask people which one has the highest classification status in the world, and people may say Chateau Lafite or some others. No, it's Chateau d'Yquem. It's even superior than the first growth. The second fun question I ask people is that what is the longest living highest price wine in the world?
It's got to be a sweet wine.
It used to be the Egon Müller's TBA, right? For the longest time. Nowadays,
a really
it's
sweet
not
German wine. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Nowadays, it's not because Domaine de la Romanée-Conti became number one. But if you think
Pinot.
about,
Okay.
For Burgundy, right? It's all the Burgundy fashion nowadays. But if you think about which one lives the longest as the top price wine in history, that is the sweet German wine.
Right. Sugar's a preservative, as is tannin, alcohol, and so on. But you mentioned TBA, and for those who may not be familiar, Trockenbeerenauslese. Thank you for giving me a chance to say that. Got to say it quickly before I muck it up. But yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense that would be a preservative. So that's sweetness. And what about bitterness? You said it's more complex. How does that relate? What do you cover in your book as it relates to bitterness and wine?
So, because evolution-wise, animals, humans, we need to be sensitive to bitterness in order to test if the plant or whatever we eat is poisonous or not before we have a chance to swallow or we decide to spit them out, right? Otherwise, if you swallow, we can still sort of get it out, but it's much harder.
Sure.
So it's a defense system. But it's not a singular compound that can be poisonous. So if you think about how animals survive, they have to be sensitive to a wide range of compounds that could taste unpleasant, like bitter, and then they recognize it's poisonous, right? Toxic.
Okay.
So, but throughout evolution, especially for human beings, nowadays we just need to read the instructions and rely on food safety programs to just say, okay, this is all safe to drink, safe to eat. So we don't need to rely on the taste, or sometimes it's a sense of smell, right? To judge if this thing is good or not. So some of the genes we got lost, but we do need quite a wide range of genes to detect different compounds as bitter.
And then in bitterness, like we still talk about, even though we just dispelled the myth of the tongue map, but we still talk about a bitter finish. So is that really not happening, or it's just that's that last perception before we swallow, and because the taste buds have the capacity for all tastes, not just bitter, but we're just getting it strongly at the back for some reason?
That needs a bit more research, but my personal understanding is that especially for let's say red wines and in certain white wines, the tannins could feel bitter to certain people. So when you put the wine on your palate, there are so many other things like fruitiness and sour and all those kind of alcohol, everything that mask those kind of tiny bit bitter sensation. But after you swallow or after you spit out, right, the residuals, you can start to see that bitterness from certain phenolics like tannins. That is what people generally agree. It is those kind of residual tannins and phenolics that gives the bitter taste. But I think this field needs more study.
Absolutely. I'm getting that as the end of a lot of questions here, but that's good. It shows just how much needs to be done. So tannins, that sort of furry mouth feeling we get when we drink over-steeped tea or eat walnuts or drink tannic wine, is that, I mean, it can give us the perception of bitterness, but do tannins themselves have a taste, or are they just astringency, a tightness, like a textural thing?
Those are what we call the tactile sensations. Those are
Right.
textural thing, mouthfeel thing, right?
Okay.
So other than the 5 or 6 basic tastes, we also have different feelings toward those kind of tactile, textural things. And that is almost like our skin, right? Our hand touch this, we feel it's hot or cold. We can position certain things. But for the mouth, right, for our tongue and all over our mouth, the trigeminal nerve will sense those kind of sensations. So we can feel the burn from chili peppers. We can probably feel burn from alcohol for certain people. And we can also feel like in China, we have a special pepper called the Sichuan peppercorn. And the Sichuan peppercorn makes you feel numb. So there's also a numbing sensation from certain food. So it's all interesting. And that is why people eat them and drink them, because it gives us a multiple different sensations that makes us exciting, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. The diversity of taste and texture. So tannins technically don't have a taste. Is that correct?
No, but wine is always a combination of all sorts of taste and smell and everything. So it's hard to isolate. If you can isolate tannin and just taste it, you will feel that it is only a tactile sensation. But rarely any food or drink has tannin in isolation. Well, probably we can go back to the real traditional, tannin industry, because the word tannin came from like tanning the animal parts and to make the leather, right?
Yeah.
So if they extract those kind of plant-based tannins to do that, and we just taste it, maybe it has less of the aromas but more of the pure taste of tannins.
We have a lot of weird homework coming off this episode, so to taste and smell. So, but I get what you're saying. Everything's a combination, therefore you start getting tasting notes like dusty tannins. So, okay, but I see where they're coming from. Why is mouthfeel so important? Is it because it just adds to that sort of, you've got the flavors, you've got the aromas, and then you've got the textural element of the mouthfeel? Is there anything else you want to say about mouthfeel?
And so it's very simple. As we discussed, it just add several other dimensions to your taste, which makes wine tasting even more interesting. But the other thing I would say is that nowadays, lots of people love to play the game of blind tasting, guessing the grape varieties, guessing the vintages, even guessing the regions without knowing what the wine is in the glass. But I would say some people rely on smell heavily just by smelling in front of the glass. But I would always encourage people to pay attention on the palate, because lots of the clues for you to play that blind tasting game came from the aroma and the taste and the tactile sensations from the wine. So get everything from the wine, not just smelling the wine.
Yeah, and I always say to my online students, full-bodied feels like, doesn't taste like, but feels like cream. Yeah. Medium-bodied, homogenized milk, 3%, and then light-bodied skim milk. Because you've got to get a sort of, weighted feeling when we talk
Yeah.
about mouthfeel, I think.
Those are good references.
Cool. What do you mean when you talk about flavor scalping? Flavor
So
scalping.
some people say some of the flavors were kind of mute or not that obvious, but it was supposed to be more pronounced. And those are not necessarily flavors. And in the book, I really pay attention to separating flavors from aromas. Because when some people say flavors, it's just the aromas. But when some people say flavors, it's a combination of everything they taste, including the taste on the tongue. So it's more about the aroma themselves that is kind of mute due to many different reasons. It could be that simply the winemaking is not that good, or it could be there are some other things such as cork taint, what people say the cork taint, the TCA, those kind of aroma, those kind of compounds that actually attack our nose and make us not able to smell other aromas. So
Okay.
when a wine is tainted by cork taint, people say, oh, it is the cork taint that destroy those aroma compounds. No, the aroma compounds are there, but it actually destroy our nose temporarily, so that we cannot perceive lots of the aromas hidden behind.
Okay. Yeah. That's fascinating. I never knew that. Now, you write a lot about color. It's one of the things that we perhaps minimize in the wine world when it comes to wine tasting. We kind of say, okay, that's pale yellow, that's dark red, whatever, ruby. How does color affect our perception of wine, especially as it relates to how we perceive its taste?
Yes, so as I mentioned, color is, first of all, easy. It's the easiest thing, so people usually look at the color first, right? Because it's kind of straightforward, even though we could see color a bit differently from each other, but it's easy as compared to smell or taste. But there's one thing that is very important to understand is that we are visual animals. We are visual beings. So we have preconceptions. We use our sight to prejudge a lot of things, which is nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. We always have these kind of things. Even though we want to be objective, we cannot.
But we're busy sorting things. Like there's just so much information in our environment. We got to handle it some way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we look at wine, I would say we could be even more biased when we see things first. For example, there are already studies showing that if you, well, I also have a white wine here, right? If
Okay.
you color the white wine as the red wine color and you ask people to smell it, they came up with all these descriptors that are related to red wines rather than the so-called white wine descriptors.
Right, like
So
the
it's-
red wine or the red fruits instead of the sort of peach, apricot, apple kind of white wine
Yeah.
descriptors. Yeah.
Exactly. And also the M&M, right? Chocolate little
Oh,
things.
yeah, M&Ms, yeah.
M&M. And they did studies on M&M, right? They are all the same flavors. But
Oh.
if you...
Oh, no. I eat the
yeah.
red ones first for no reason. Wow.
And you would assume, especially for kids, you would assume that they have a preference towards things because they have preference towards the color. And if even they ask certain adults who are not familiar with the product to do experimentations on, they would assume the yellow ones would have more lemon flavor
Right.
versus those kind of chocolatey ones would have more chocolate flavor. No, they are all the same flavor.
Oh my gosh, another big myth busted here. And there's certain movie stars who require only certain color M&Ms be in their, movie trailer on set. Well, they're just creating a lot of nothing work for their
No,
aids.
they're all relevant. We are living in the visual world. So, like, I always embrace my preconception on things because I see that thing first, and I don't do anything to just deliberately go against that. It's how we naturally behave, right?
Yeah, that's true. I just like to be judgy when it comes to movie stars, but that's something different.
Of course.
So if you were colorblind, say you couldn't perceive the red-green colorblind thing attribute, how would that change the way you experience wine? does it?
Yes, so I would say there's nothing you can do if you're really colorblind. For example, certain people are not crazily colorblind. They may have difficulties judging from red to green, but they can see a difference. But certain people, unfortunately, a very tiny amount of the population, they really cannot see lots of colors. It's kind of rare, but you shouldn't feel so sad because you can enjoy the sense of smell, you can enjoy the sense of taste. You don't have to say this white wine has to be like a lemony or this red wine has to be some like purple-ish color. You don't have to, because most of the time we put the wine in our mouths, we enjoy the liquid, right? So
That's true.
Don't worry too much. And again, there's nothing you can do if it is something deeply genetic. For example, I didn't mention in my book because I cannot just put that photo in my book due to copyright issues. But if you think about it, many years ago, there's a huge social media thing on a dress. Some people look at it as white and gold, and some people look at as black and blue. And people were debating, people were even fighting among families. I'm like, unless you have a technology to just change your genetic immediately now, right?
Right.
You will still see the color as you see. It's genetic. It's not because you think in a weird way, right?
Wow. That's, yeah, I do remember there's a huge uproar on that. People calling other people crazy that they couldn't see clearly this is a white dress. I mean, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, and now science explained, right? Not fully explained, but it explained that certain, so I'll try to explain in a very simple term. Certain genetics will give your expression of the proteins in the eyes differently. So certain people at certain position in the eye will express certain proteins. Some other people will express another type of protein. So they're hugely different. That will influence the way we see certain colors. So because of the expression of different proteins, we will see certain people see more sensitive to red light as compared to certain people will be more sensitive to green light. So with all these kind of combinations, people will see that dress differently.
I love it. That's great. That's going to settle an argument once and for all at this Thanksgiving this year. I can't wait to bring it up again. Now, your book delves into oak aging, and you're quite a specialist on this, the chemistry of oak aging. Maybe talk about what is the most interesting aspect of oak aging for you. We'll get to a couple other things as well.
Yeah, so for oak, I just mentioned something in the book because now I understand more about oak. Oak is worth another book to write about.
It's a big topic, yeah.
Yeah, but basically what I want to say is that there are differences in oak. Just like in wine, there are just so many different factors that contribute to the differences. For example, different oak varieties, species, different forests, different growing environment, they can hugely change the flavors of oak. And also, when people make oak, they use different toasting levels, using different ways of controlling the temperatures, and those will change the flavors a lot. So I would say if a winemaker or as a wine consumer, we taste wine with oak or we marry wine with oak, it is almost like getting to a relationship or getting to marriage where there are 500 million people that maybe not a lot. There are hundreds of people you could choose from, but there are how do I say this? Okay, let's just say boys and girls. Okay, there are hundreds of girls out there. There are hundreds of boys out there. Okay, and you try to find the perfect match, right? But it doesn't mean that it has to be this girl or this boy. There are just so many different options. So we have so many different grape varieties and from different growing environments. We also have different oak species from different terroir. So there's just so many options out there.
Including non-binary. So yeah, it just gets really confusing, right? Just but wonderfully diverse. I mean, that's the point of it. What is the Maillard reaction when it comes to oak toasting? You just talked about oak toasting there.
Yeah, so Maillard reaction is, in simple terms, is actually sugar reacting with proteins uh, on high temperatures. So when we do cooking, we almost all experience Maillard reactions almost every day if you love to cook. But for oak, the heating part and especially the breakdown into sugar part may cause some Maillard reactions, but it needs proteins, right? Where did the protein come from? Is wine. So you have the sugar and heating part in oak, but then you need wine, protein, if there's any left in it, to interact with the oak. So I would say for oak reactions is more of a, how to say, a combination of different sources, whereas we do see the real Maillard reaction happen in one type of wine, which is traditional method sparkling, especially champagne.
Oh,
If you think about it, champagne usually, of course, nowadays some people do not add sugar at all, but usually they add a tiny bit of dosage, the sugar, right? And then you also have the proteins, amino acids released from the long lease aging autolysis process. So
yeah.
those with long term, without heating, there's no heating in champagne, but just long term aging in that bottle, you could have more and more Maillard reactions. So that is an interesting point to me as well, because lots of people, because of our preconceptions, think, oh, champagne is so wonderful because of all the bubbles. But you know what? To me, it's not only because of the bubbles. Champagne is so fascinating because it's also a drink that contains more umami taste and all this kind of complexity from the Maillard reactions. And that's actually making me feeling champagne or all traditional method sparkling wines are fascinating to drink.
Yeah, so the Maillard, like, does it have a certain taste? It's the sugar and the proteins combining. Does it? It just gives the when they combine it, you're just getting that umami, savory deliciousness. That's
The
the
only
reaction.
yeah, the only predictable part is that it will become more complex. But Maillard reaction is just a reaction. After the reaction, we will have thousands or even millions of different compounds created from that reaction. So it's kind of unpredictable in terms of specific taste or smell, but
Wow.
it's definitely becoming more complex. And again, that's why we cook. Otherwise, we
Yeah.
would just eat certain things raw.
Everything raw, yeah. And for those who are listening or watching, Maillard, is it Maillard? Maillard?
Yes,
Maillard. Okay,
Maya.
not pronouncing the L like I did at first. Okay, cool. My goodness, the time has flown, and I've gotten maybe halfway through all the questions here, Gus, as I thought.
Just
Your book
no
is
worries.
amazing. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to mention? Any areas specifically that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, I think we touched a lot of things. Even just half of the questions were probably like we talk about many other interesting things in daily life. So I want to emphasize on the fact that after reading the book, first, again, chemistry is fun. I hope it's easy for you to understand the chemistry part of the book. And I try to relate all these kind of examples into our daily life. So it should be pretty straightforward, but if not, I will welcome feedback. But the other very important thing is that we are different from each other. We live in our own sensory world, whether it's because of genetics or it's because how we brought up or how even just at the moment, how the surrounding environment influence our taste. So pay attention to your own sense of smell, sense of taste. Pay attention to what you see from your own eye, but also appreciate the fact that other people may likely smell, taste, and see things and hear things differently from your perspective.
I love that. That's a recipe for human understanding and world peace, I think, there, right in that wine glass.
And enjoy the most important thing.
Enjoy.
Enjoy your own sensory world.
Absolutely. So the book is Behind the Glass. Gus, this is fabulous. Where can we find you and the book online?
Oh,
There it
so
is.
To me, just find me on guszhu.com, very straightforward, my name.com. But more importantly, I think the website linked to the official website of the publisher's website, Academy du Vin Library, and it has my book, and you can order on it or order on some other platforms like Amazon. I think the e-version, Kindle version will come up, will be available soon. Back to Academy du Vin, I feel very lucky to work with the publisher by chance, and because it's a legacy of the great Steven Spurrier. So I'm now in Napa, and Napa, California wine industry basically got its fame because of him. So I feel really lucky to contribute to a little tiny piece to the library that he founded.
Absolutely. It's quite a tribute. Steven Spurrier, UK-based wine writer, very elegant. He hosted the 1976 Judgment of Paris, where California bested the best of France in a blind tasting by French judges, wine judges. So he left quite a legacy, including the Académie du Vin, which is a collection of the world's best wine books on different regions and aspects of wine. And we'll put a link to Académie du Vin and where people can find you online, Gus, in the show notes. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. That conversation was fascinating, and
we'll
have to have you back to finish. I know.
I should go to Canada or come to Napa. We'll have a drink and have
or a bottle.
Drinks to talk things
Yeah. Absolutely. This is fantastic. So I'll say goodbye for now. Don't log off, but thank you so much, Gus.
Thank you, Natalie. Cheers.
Cheers.